The old pickup truck bounced along the dusty desert road, kicking up clouds of red dirt that seemed to hang in the air forever. Dr. Amanda Chun gripped the dashboard as the vehicle hit another pothole, her laptop sliding across the seat beside her. She'd been traveling for 3 hours now, leaving the comfortable air conditioning of Phoenix behind for this remote research station in the middle of Arizona's harsh desert. "You sure about this, Doc?" asked the driver, a weathered Park Ranger who'd been shaking his head since they left the main highway. "Weather Service is calling for some serious windstorms this week. Most folks are heading the other way." Amanda pushed her glasses up her nose and checked her equipment one more time. As a meteorologist, she'd spent the last 5 years studying weather patterns from behind a computer screen. This was her chance to finally get out in the field and witness something real, something that could make her career. "I'm sure," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "The data I'm collecting here could change how we predict desert storms. 3 months is nothing compared to what we might learn." The research station appeared like a mirage in the distance, a small cluster of buildings surrounded by solar panels and weather monitoring equipment. It looked tiny against the endless expanse of desert that stretched to the mountains on the horizon. Amanda had seen photos, but being here in person felt different. The isolation was overwhelming. As they pulled up to the main building, a tall man emerged from the shade of a covered porch. He wore a faded baseball cap, dusty jeans, and had the kind of deep tan that came from years of working under the desert sun. His movements were slow and deliberate, like someone who'd learned to conserve energy in the heat. "That's your guide?" the ranger said, nodding toward the man. "Tommy Rodriguez. Best desert guide in the state. If anyone can keep you safe out here, it's him." Tommy approached the truck with a slight smile, but Amanda could see the concern in his eyes as he looked at her city clothes and the boxes of delicate equipment in the truck bed. She'd worn her best field gear, khaki pants, and a button-down shirt that looked professional in the store but felt completely wrong here in the desert. "Dr. Chun?" Tommy extended a calloused hand. "Welcome to the middle of nowhere." His handshake was firm but not crushing, and Amanda noticed how his eyes scanned the horizon automatically, like someone always checking the weather. She'd read his file: former military, grew up in the desert, knew every rock and rattlesnake for miles around. The research station hired him for dangerous assignments because he'd never lost a client. "Thank you for agreeing to stay," Amanda said, trying to match his casual tone. "I know 3 months is a long commitment." Tommy shrugged as he hefted her equipment from the truck. "It's honest work. Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't walk into a cactus or try to pet a scorpion." The ranger laughed and wished Amanda luck before driving away, leaving her alone with Tommy in the vast silence of the desert. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed impossible. She'd never seen colors like that in the city. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Tommy said, following her gaze. "First time in the desert? For fieldwork, yes. I've flown over it plenty of times." Amanda realized how that sounded, like she was some sheltered academic who'd never left her office. "I mean, I've studied desert weather patterns for years, but actually being here is different." "Everything's different out here," Tommy agreed. "Desert has its own rules. You'll learn." He led her through the research station, showing her the reinforced bunker where the most sensitive equipment was stored, the small kitchen and living quarters, and the observation deck with its array of weather instruments. Everything was built to withstand extreme conditions: thick walls, small windows, and backup systems for the backup systems. "This bunker," Tommy said, patting the concrete wall, "can handle pretty much anything nature throws at it. 100-mile-an-hour winds, hail, flash floods. Your predecessor used it during that big storm 2 years ago." Amanda ran her hand along the smooth concrete. It felt solid, permanent. "What happened to him?" "Transferred to Alaska. Said he missed snow." Tommy's smile was slight but genuine. "Desert's not for everyone." That evening they sat on the observation deck watching the stars appear one by one. The desert night was surprisingly cold, and Amanda pulled her jacket tighter as Tommy pointed out constellations she'd never noticed in the city's light pollution. So what exactly are you hoping to find out here? He asked, his voice quiet in the desert stillness. Amanda launched into her explanation about pressure systems and wind patterns, but caught herself when she noticed Tommy's polite but confused expression. She tried again, simpler this time. Desert storms are different from regular storms. They form fast, hit hard, and disappear just as quickly, but we don't really understand why. The data I collect here could help us warn people before these storms. Hit. Tommy nodded slowly. That's important work. Lost a good friend to a flash flood that came out of nowhere? If we'd had better warning, he trailed off, staring into the darkness. Amanda felt the weight of his words and understood that this wasn't just academic research to him. People's lives depended on better weather prediction. Over the next few days, they fell into a routine. Amanda would work with her instruments and computers while Tommy maintained the station and checked the equipment. He was quietly competent, fixing problems before she even knew they existed, and somehow always appearing with cold water when she needed it most. But Amanda began to notice something in Tommy's behavior. He spent more time than usual checking weather reports, and she caught him studying the horizon with a worried expression. When she asked about it, he just shrugged and said the weather felt restless. On the fourth day, Tommy found her in the bunker, bent over her laptop and surrounded by printouts. The expression on his face made her stomach tighten. What is it? She asked. Weather Service just updated their forecast. There's a storm system building to the west. Big one. They're recommending evacuation for the whole area. Amanda looked at her screens, seeing the same data that had probably prompted the warning. The storm was massive, unlike anything in the historical records. It was exactly what she'd come here to study. This is perfect, she said, excitement overriding her. Common sense. This is exactly the kind of system I need to observe. Tommy was already shaking his head. Doc, this isn't a regular storm. The winds they're predicting could flip a car. The sand will strip paint off metal. We should pack up and head back to Phoenix. But the data I could collect. Amanda gestured at her equipment. This might be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It might be once-in-a-lifetime period, Tommy said grimly. As in the last thing we ever do. Amanda studied the weather data again, her scientific curiosity warring with her survival instincts. Tommy was right. The storm looked dangerous. But she'd come so far, invested so much in this project. Walking away now felt like giving up on everything she'd worked for. The bunker can handle it, right? She asked. You said it was built for extreme weather. Tommy was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving between Amanda and the weather displays. She could see him weighing risks, calculating odds, making the kind of decision that could save lives or end them. If we do this, he said finally, we do it my way, no arguments, no second-guessing. When I say something, you listen, deal? Amanda nodded, her heart racing with anticipation and fear. Deal. As they began preparing the station for the approaching storm, neither of them could have imagined how completely their lives were about to change. The desert was about to test them in ways they never expected, and in the process, reveal truths about themselves they'd never known existed. The first signs of the storm arrived just before dawn. Amanda woke to the sound of wind rattling the windows and something she'd never heard before, a deep, rumbling sound like distant thunder that never stopped. She stumbled to the small window and peered out into the gray morning light. The world had changed overnight. What had been clear desert landscape was now a wall of moving sand that stretched as far as she could see. The wind was already strong enough to bend the metal weather. Instruments and the air itself seemed thick and angry. It's starting, Tommy said from behind her. He was already dressed and holding 2 cups of coffee. Storms moving faster than they predicted. Amanda accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. How long do we have? Maybe an hour before it gets really bad. 2 hours before it gets dangerous. Tommy moved to the radio equipment and began checking frequencies. I'm trying to reach the weather service, but we're already getting interference. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. They moved all the essential equipment into the reinforced bunker. secured everything that could blow away, and double-checked their emergency supplies. Amanda had never prepared for anything like this, so she followed Tommy's lead, impressed by how methodically he worked. "Food for a week, water for 10 days, Tommy said, checking items off a list. "First aid kit, battery. Radio, flashlights, extra batteries. We should be fine for a few days." "A few days?" Amanda looked up from the weather computer she was setting up. "The forecast said the storm would pass by tomorrow evening." Tommy glanced at her weather display, then back at the window where the world was disappearing behind a wall of sand. "Forecasts are just guesses, Doc. Desert makes its own rules." By noon, the storm hit with full force. The sound was incredible, like standing inside a waterfall made of wind and sand. The bunker's thick walls muffled the worst of it, but they could still feel the building shaking with each gust. Amanda tried to work on her computers, but the constant noise made it hard to concentrate. "This is amazing," she said, watching the readings on her instruments. "The wind speeds are off the charts." "Amazing isn't the word I'd use," Tommy replied, checking the door seals for the third time. "More like terrifying." Amanda looked at him with surprise. "You're scared?" "Anyone with sense would be scared. Fear keeps you alive out here." Tommy sat down across from her at the small table. "But being scared doesn't mean you can't do what needs to be done." The power went out just after sunset. The backup generators kicked in immediately, but the sudden darkness outside made the bunker feel even more isolated. They were completely cut off from the outside world now. No radio, no internet, no way to call for help if something went wrong. "Tell me about yourself," Amanda said, trying to distract herself from the howling wind. "I read your file. What files?" "Don't tell you much about a person." Tommy was quiet for a moment, listening to the storm. "Not much to tell. Grew up in Tucson, joined the army, came back home. Been guiding people through the desert for 8 years now. Family? Dad died when I was in Afghanistan. Mom moved to Florida to be closer to my sister." Tommy's voice was matter of fact, but Amanda could hear the loneliness underneath. "What about you? What makes a city girl want to study desert storms?" Amanda found herself telling him about her childhood in Seattle, where it rained constantly and she'd spend hours watching weather reports, fascinated by the patterns. About her ex-husband who called her work playing with computers and couldn't understand why she'd want to spend 3 months in the desert. "We divorced 6 months ago," she said, surprising herself with the admission. "He said I cared more about weather than about him. Maybe he was right. Were you happy with him?" The question caught her off guard. "I thought I was. Now I'm not." "Sure, I remember what happy feels like." Tommy nodded slowly. "I know that feeling. After my dad died, I felt like I was just going through the motions. Work, sleep, work, sleep. Wasn't really living." The storm raged through the night, and neither of them slept well. The bunker had 2 small cots separated by a curtain, but the constant noise and vibration made rest impossible. They took turns checking the equipment and making sure nothing was failing. On the second day, Amanda's carefully organized scientific mission began to fall apart. The satellite uplink failed, cutting off her connection to the main weather database. 2 of her monitoring stations outside went offline, probably buried under sand or blown away entirely. Her laptop's battery was running low, and she had to ration power to keep the essential instruments running. "This isn't how it was supposed to go," she said, staring at her dead computer screen. "I had plans, procedures, backup systems for everything." Tommy looked up from the radio he was trying to repair. "Desert doesn't care about your plans. It's got its own agenda. How can you be so calm about this?" Amanda felt frustration building inside her. "We're trapped in here, my equipment is failing, and we don't even know if anyone knows where we are." "Getting upset won't change anything," Tommy said gently. "My dad used to say that the desert teaches you what you can control and what you can't. You can't control the storm, but you can control how you react to it." Something in his voice made Amanda stop and really look at him. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor, working on the radio with steady hands despite the chaos around them. His calmness wasn't indifference, it was hard-won wisdom. "Your dad sounds like he was a wise man." He was worked construction in the desert for 30 years. Taught me that respect and patience will get you through more than panic and force. Tommy held up a wire from the radio. Like this, I could force it, probably break it. Or I can be patient, figure out the problem, fix it right. By the third day, their situation had become more serious. The storm showed no signs of weakening, and they were running lower on supplies than expected. The water recycling system was working, but their food was going faster than planned. More importantly, the air filtration system was struggling with the amount of dust in the air. We need to conserve everything, Tommy said, dividing their remaining food into smaller portions. Eat less, drink less, move less. The storm has to end eventually. Amanda watched him work, noting how he took the smaller portion for himself without comment. In the 3 days they'd been trapped together, she'd learned more about his character than months of conversation might have revealed. He was quietly competent, never complained, and seemed to anticipate problems before they became serious. "Tommy," she said suddenly. "Thank you. For what? For staying? For taking care of me? For not saying I told you so when everything went wrong?" Tommy smiled, and for the first time since the storm began, it reached his eyes. "We're partners now, Doc. Partners take care of each other." That night, as the storm continued its relentless assault on their shelter, Amanda found herself thinking about partnership, about what it meant to depend on someone completely and to have them depend on you. Her marriage had never felt like a true partnership. It had been more like two people living parallel lives. But here, in this tiny bunker, with the desert trying to kill them, she was experiencing something she'd never felt before: complete trust. Complete cooperation. Complete honesty about who they really were when everything else was stripped away. As she finally drifted off to sleep, listening to Tommy's steady breathing from the other cot, Amanda realized that the storm was changing more than just the landscape. Outside, it was changing something inside her too, something she hadn't even known needed changing. The fourth day brought new problems. Amanda woke to find Tommy already up, examining the air filtration system with a deep frown on his face. The constant sound of the storm had become like background noise, but now she noticed something different, a rattling sound that hadn't been there before. "What's wrong?" she asked, though she could already guess from his expression. "Filters clogged with dust. I've cleaned it twice already, but it's not keeping up." Tommy wiped his hands on a rag, leaving streaks of red desert dust. "Air's getting thicker in here." Amanda felt a flutter of panic in her chest. She'd been so focused on her weather data that she hadn't noticed the air quality declining. Now that he mentioned it, she could feel the difference. Breathing required more effort, and there was a fine layer of dust on everything despite the sealed bunker. "How long do we have?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Hard to say. Maybe 12 hours before it becomes a real problem. Maybe less." Tommy moved to their supply cabinet and began pulling out tools. "But I'm not giving up yet. There's always a solution if you're willing to work for it." Amanda watched him dismantle the filtration system with methodical precision. His hands moved with the confidence of someone who'd fixed things his whole life, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. This was serious. "What can I do to help?" "You can tell me about pressure systems," Tommy said, not looking up from his work. "Keep talking while I work. Helps me think." So Amanda found herself explaining meteorology in simple terms while Tommy worked. She talked about how air moved across the desert, how temperature differences created wind, how storms formed and dissipated. It felt strange to be discussing the science of weather while trapped inside the very phenomenon she'd come to study. "You really love this stuff," Tommy observed, pausing to wipe sweat from his forehead. "Your whole face lights up when you talk about it. My ex-husband used to say I got more excited about storm fronts than about him," Amanda said, then immediately wondered why she'd shared that. "Sounds like he was jealous of your passion instead of proud of it." Tommy's voice was matter-of-fact, but there was an edge to it. "Man should support his wife's dreams, not tear them down." The simple statement hit Amanda harder than she expected. In all their years together, David had never once asked her to explain her work or shown genuine interest in what she did. He tolerated it, but never celebrated it. "There," Tommy said, reassembling the last piece of the filter. "That should buy us some time." The improvement was immediate. The air felt cleaner, and the oppressive feeling Amanda hadn't even realized was building began to lift. But their relief was short-lived. Around noon, they heard a new sound, a deep groaning that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "What was that?" Amanda asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Tommy was already moving toward the structural support beams, running his hands along the concrete. Buildings under stress, more than it was designed for. Another groan echoed. Through the bunker, longer this time. Amanda felt her scientific curiosity warring with very real fear. The storm was stronger than anything in the historical records, and they were learning firsthand why the Weather Service had recommended evacuation. "Is it going to hold?" she asked. Tommy continued his inspection, checking joints and supports. "It's held this long, but ... He paused, his hand on a beam that seemed to be vibrating slightly. "We need to be ready to move to the safest part of the bunker if things get worse." That afternoon, they reorganized their supplies, moving everything essential to the center of the bunker where the structure was strongest. They worked together without much conversation, but Amanda found herself acutely aware of Tommy's presence. The way he moved efficiently through the small space, how he seemed to anticipate what she needed before she asked, the quiet competence that made her feel safe even in their dangerous situation. "Tommy," she said as they finished securing their equipment, "can I ask you something personal?" "Shoot." "Have you ever been married?" Tommy was quiet for a moment, organizing medical supplies. "Engaged once, long time ago." "What happened?" "She said I loved the desert more than I loved her. Maybe she was right." He looked up at Amanda. "What about you?" "Besides the ex-husband, I mean. Ever find someone who understood your work?" Amanda shook her head. "I kept thinking I would, eventually. Someone who'd be excited when I got excited about a new discovery. Someone who'd understand why I'd want to spend 3 months in the desert chasing storms." "Maybe you were looking in the wrong places." Before Amanda could ask what he meant, another structural groan filled the bunker, this one accompanied by a small shower of dust from the ceiling. They both looked up, and Amanda saw her own fear reflected in Tommy's eyes. "Time to move," he said calmly. "Bring the essentials." They relocated to the strongest part of the bunker, a small space barely large enough for 2 people to sit comfortably. Their supplies were arranged around them, and they settled in to wait. The storm seemed to be getting worse, if that was possible, and the building's protests were becoming more frequent. "Tell me about your dad," Amanda said, needing distraction. From the sounds above them, Tommy's expression softened. "He was the strongest man I ever knew. Not just physically, though he was that too. But he had this inner strength, this calm that nothing could shake. Lost his job twice, went through a rough patch with drinking when I was a kid, but he never gave up. Never stopped fighting for our family. He sounds amazing. He was. Taught me that strength isn't about never being scared. It's about doing what's right even when you are scared." Tommy glanced at the ceiling as another groan echoed through the space. "Like staying out here with you instead of heading back to Phoenix?" Amanda felt something warm bloom in her chest. "You were scared to stay?" "Terrified. But you needed someone. Who knew the desert, and I couldn't let you face this alone." Tommy's voice was quiet, almost lost in the storm's noise. "Some things are worth the risk." The way he said it made Amanda look at him more carefully. There was something in his eyes, an intensity that had nothing to do with their current danger. She felt her breath catch, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, how intimate this small space felt. "Tommy, A tremendous crack interrupted her words, followed by a sound like the world splitting open. The bunker shuddered, and for a terrifying moment, Amanda thought it might collapse entirely. Tommy's arm came around her instinctively, pulling her against him as debris fell from above. They sat frozen, waiting for the building to fail completely. But after what felt like an eternity, the sound subsided. The storm continued its assault, but the bunker held. We're okay, Tommy whispered, but he didn't let go of her. We're going to be okay. Amanda realized she was shaking and not just from fear. Being held by Tommy felt right in a way that surprised her. Safe, but also something more. She looked up at him, seeing concern and determination in his eyes, but also something else. Something that made her heart race. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything. For keeping me safe, for staying with me, for not giving up." "I'm not going anywhere," Tommy said, his voice rough with emotion. "Whatever happens, we face it together." In that moment, surrounded by the fury of the desert storm but safe in each other's presence, Amanda realized that something fundamental had changed between them. They weren't just two people trapped together anymore. They were partners in the truest sense, bound by shared danger and mutual trust. The storm raged on outside, but inside their small sanctuary, something new was beginning to grow. Something that neither of them had expected to find in the middle of the desert, but that might just be worth all the danger they'd faced to discover it. The fifth day dawned with an eerie silence that was almost more unsettling than the storm had been. Amanda woke to find Tommy already at the small window, peering out through the reinforced glass. The constant howling of wind had stopped some time during the night, leaving behind a quiet that felt unnatural after days of chaos. "Is it over?" she asked, stretching muscles that ached from sleeping on the hard floor. "Eye of the storm," Tommy said quietly. "We're right in the center now. It'll be calm for a few hours, then the back half hits us." Amanda joined him at the window and gasped. The world outside looked like another planet. Sand dunes had formed, where none existed before, completely reshaping the landscape. The research station's other buildings were buried up to their roofs, and twisted metal from destroyed equipment lay scattered across the desert like broken toys. "It's beautiful," she whispered, then immediately felt foolish for the comment. "It is," Tommy agreed, surprising her. "Terrible and beautiful at the same time. That's the desert for you." They spent the morning checking their supplies and assessing the damage to the bunker. The structure had held, but barely. Several support beams showed stress fractures, and there was a crack in the north wall that hadn't been there before. Tommy worked methodically to shore up the weakest points, preparing for the second half of the storm. "How much longer?" Amanda asked, helping him move supplies away from the damaged wall. "Few more hours of calm, then another day or two of wind. Maybe not as bad as the first half, but we can't count on that." Tommy paused in his work, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Amanda, I need to tell you something." The serious tone in his voice made her look up from the medical kit she was organizing. "What is it?" Tommy reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, worn smooth from years of handling. Amanda's breath caught in her throat as he opened it, revealing a simple gold ring with a single diamond that caught the filtered light from the window. "This was my grandmother's ring," he said, his voice steady but quiet. "She gave it to me before she died, told me to save it for the right woman at the right time." Amanda stared at the ring, her mind racing. "Tommy, I don't understand. We've known each other for less than a week." "I know how it sounds," Tommy said, closing the box but keeping it in his hands. "Crazy, impulsive, maybe the isolation is getting to me." He looked directly at her, his brown eyes serious. "But I've never been more sure of anything in my life." "Sure of what?" "That you're the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with." The words hung in the air between them, and Amanda felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. This was impossible. People didn't fall in love in 5 days. They didn't propose to virtual strangers in the middle of a crisis. "Tommy, you don't really know me," she said, trying to keep her voice gentle. "We're in an extreme situation." People form intense bonds during trauma, but that doesn't mean what? Tommy interrupted, but not unkindly. "That I don't know you're brave enough to risk your life for your work? That I don't know you're kind enough to worry about me when you're the one in danger? That I don't know you're strong enough to keep going when everything falls apart?" Amanda opened her mouth to argue, but Tommy continued. "I know you put extra sugar in your coffee when you're stressed. I know you hum when you're concentrating on something difficult. I know you're scared of spiders, but you'll face down a desert storm without blinking. His voice grew softer. I know you've been hurt before, and you think love is supposed to be complicated and painful, but maybe it doesn't have to be. This is insane, Amanda said, but even as she spoke, she could feel something shifting inside her. We're trapped in a bunker in the middle of a storm. This isn't real life. This is the most real life gets, Tommy said firmly. When everything else is stripped away, when you can't hide behind work or routine or the things you think you're supposed to want, this is who we really are, Amanda. And I like who you are. I more than like it. Amanda looked at him, really looked at him. The calm strength that had kept them alive. The quiet competence that made her feel safe. The way he listened when she talked about her work, not just waiting for his turn to speak, but actually hearing her, the way he'd stayed with her when anyone with sense would have left. I'm scared, she admitted. Of the storm? Of this. Of you. Of what you're asking me to feel. Tommy moved closer, but slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. I'm scared too. But I'm more scared of letting you walk away without telling you how I feel. What if you're wrong? What if this is just the situation making us both crazy? Then we'll figure it out together. But Amanda, I don't think I'm wrong. I think I knew the moment you decided to stay for the storm. Anyone who's that passionate about something, that willing to risk everything for what they believe in, that's someone worth loving. Amanda felt tears threatening, though she wasn't sure if they were from fear or something else entirely. This is happening too fast. Is it, or is it happening exactly when it's supposed to? Tommy held up the ring box again. I'm not asking you to marry me right now. I'm asking you to consider the possibility that what we've found here is real. That it's worth exploring. The bunker fell silent except for the soft whisper of the air filtration system. Amanda stared at the ring, at Tommy's hopeful face, at the cracked wall that reminded her how fragile everything was. How quickly life could change. How rare it was to find someone who saw you completely and loved what they saw. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course, but Amanda? Tommy's voice was gentle but urgent. Don't overthink this. Your brain is brilliant, but sometimes the heart knows things the mind takes years to figure out. Before she could respond, the wind began to pick up again. The calm was ending, and the second half of the storm was approaching. They could hear it in the distance, a low rumble that grew stronger by the minute. Here it comes, Tommy said, pocketing the ring box and moving to secure their supplies. You ready for round two? Amanda watched him prepare for the renewed assault, noting how he moved with purpose despite having just put his heart on the line, how he could shift from the most vulnerable moment of his life back to protecting them both without missing a beat. Maybe that was love, she thought. Not the dramatic, complicated emotion she'd always expected, but something simpler and stronger. Someone who showed up when you needed them. Someone who saw the best in you even when you were at your worst. Someone who made you feel like you could face anything as long as you faced it together. The storm hit again with renewed fury, but this time Amanda wasn't just focused on survival. She was thinking about what came after, about whether courage meant just weathering the storm, or if it meant being brave enough to believe in something beautiful when it appeared in the most unlikely place. As the wind howled around their shelter, and Tommy worked to keep them safe, Amanda realized that her answer was already forming, not in her head, where she'd spent so many years overthinking every decision, but in her heart, where the truth had been waiting all along. The rescue helicopter found them on the 7th day, just as their water supplies were running dangerously low. Amanda heard the distant thrum of rotor blades through the bunker's thick walls and felt a mixture of relief and unexpected sadness. Relief that they'd survived, but sadness that their time alone together was ending. That's our ride, Tommy said, checking the radio one last time. The rescue team had finally managed to reach them after the storm cleared, and the outside world was flooding back into their isolated bubble. Amanda gathered her equipment with automatic movements, but her mind was elsewhere. She'd spent the last 2 days thinking about Tommy's proposal, turning it over in her mind like a puzzle she couldn't solve. Every logical argument said it was too soon, too crazy, too risky. But every time she looked at him, every time he anticipated her needs or made her laugh despite their dire situation, logic seemed less important. The rescue team arrived with military precision, checking them for injuries and preparing to evacuate them back to Phoenix. Amanda submitted to the medical examination while watching Tommy coordinate with the team leader, his natural authority evident even in this unfamiliar situation. "You folks got lucky," the paramedic said, shining a light in Amanda's eyes. "Another day or two and dehydration would have been a real problem. Plus, that bunker took a beating. Structural engineers are going to want to look at it before anyone uses it again." Amanda nodded, but she was watching Tommy help load their equipment into the helicopter. He moved with the same calm efficiency he'd shown throughout the storm, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. The question hung between them, unanswered and growing more complicated with each passing hour. The flight back to Phoenix was surreal. Below them, the desert stretched endlessly, showing fresh scars from the storm. New arroyos carved by flash floods, sand dunes where none had existed before, and the research station itself looking tiny and vulnerable against the vast landscape. "Hard to believe we were down there," Amanda said, having to raise her voice. Over the helicopter noise, Tommy followed her gaze. "Feels like a different world already." That was exactly what Amanda was afraid of. In the bunker, surrounded by danger and dependent on each other completely, their connection had felt natural and inevitable. But now, returning to normal life, would it seem like a beautiful dream that couldn't survive reality? Back in Phoenix, the debriefing process was exhausting. Amanda spent hours with Weather Service officials, describing her observations and turning over her data. The storm had been unprecedented, and her first-hand account was valuable for future predictions. She should have been excited about the scientific implications, but instead she felt disconnected from it all. Tommy disappeared after the initial medical checks, saying he had to report to his supervisor and arrange for equipment replacement. Amanda wanted to talk to him to finish their conversation, but suddenly there were hotel rooms and phone calls to make and the normal world pulling them in different directions. Her phone had dozens of missed calls. Her research supervisor, colleagues, even her ex-husband had heard about the storm and wanted to know she was safe. Amanda answered the important ones, but each conversation felt strange, like she was explaining someone else's experience. "You sound different," her research partner Lisa said during their video call. "Are you okay? I mean, really okay?" Amanda looked at herself in the hotel mirror. She did look different. Her skin was tanned from the desert sun. Her hair was simpler without her usual styling products, and there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "I'm fine," she said, but even as she said it, she knew it wasn't the whole truth. She wasn't fine, she was changed. The question was whether that change was temporary or permanent. 3 days passed without word from Tommy. Amanda threw herself into writing her report, analyzing the data she'd collected and preparing her presentation for the National Weather Service. The storm had generated enough information for several research papers, and her career would probably benefit significantly from the experience, but every time she sat down to write, she found herself thinking about Tommy instead, the way he'd looked at her when he showed her the ring. The certainty in his voice when he'd said he wanted to spend his life with her. The way he'd made her feel safe, not just physically, but emotionally, in a way she'd never experienced before. On the 4th day, she couldn't stand it anymore. She drove to the address listed in his file, a small apartment complex on the outskirts of Phoenix. Tommy's truck was in the parking lot. Covered with desert dust and looking as battered as she felt, he answered the door in jeans and a faded t-shirt, looking surprised but not unhappy to see her. "Amanda, how are you doing?" "I've been better," she said honestly. "Can I come in?" His apartment was small but comfortable, with photographs of desert landscapes on the walls and bookshelves full of survival manuals and nature guides. It felt like him, practical, unpretentious, and somehow peaceful. "I've been thinking about what you said," Amanda began, then stopped. Now that she was here, the words were harder to find than she'd expected. "And?" Tommy's voice was carefully neutral. but she could see the hope in his eyes. "And I think you're crazy," she said, then rushed to continue before he could respond. "But I also think you might be right. About us, I mean, about what we found in that bunker." Tommy sat down across from her, giving her space to talk. "I've been trying to go back to my normal life," Amanda continued. "But nothing feels normal anymore. I keep thinking about how I felt when I was with you. Not just safe, but seen, like you understood parts of me I didn't even know existed." "I do understand you," Tommy said quietly. "Better than I've ever understood anyone, but it's still crazy. We've known each other for a week. People don't fall in love in a week. Some people don't. Maybe we're not some people?" Tommy leaned forward, his expression serious. "Amanda, I've been thinking too, about what you said about it being too fast, too extreme. And you're right. But I keep coming back to the same question. If not now, when?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, when is the right time to recognize something good when it happens? When is the right time to take a chance on happiness? When is the right time to stop protecting yourself and start living?" Amanda felt tears threatening again. "I'm scared it won't work. I'm scared we'll try and fail and ruin whatever we did have." "I'm scared too," Tommy admitted. "But I'm more scared of spending the rest of my life wondering what if we're the kind of people who can make this work? What if what we found in that storm is strong enough to survive the real world?" Amanda looked around his apartment at the evidence of a life lived simply but fully, at the man who kept her safe and seen her clearly and loved her anyway, at the possibility of a future she'd never imagined but suddenly wanted more than anything. "I don't know how to do this," she said finally. "I don't know how to love someone this much this fast." "Neither do I," Tommy said, moving to sit beside her. "But I'm willing to learn if you are." Amanda looked at him, really looked at him, and saw her future in his eyes. Not the future she'd planned, but the one she'd never dared to hope for. Future built on trust and understanding and the kind of love that appeared when you least expected it but most needed it. "Ask me again," she said quietly. Tommy smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him since the rescue. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the worn velvet box, opening it to reveal his grandmother's ring. "Amanda Chun," he said, his voice steady and sure, "will you marry me?" This time she didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "Yes, I will." As Tommy slipped the ring onto her finger, Amanda realized that sometimes the most unexpected storms bring the most beautiful clearings. Sometimes getting lost is the only way to find where you really belong. And sometimes love doesn't wait for the perfect moment, it creates one.